Welcome back to all of you. We are ready for the second session, and as you can see, we have new speakers on the podium, and we will first invite Paul Dickinson to start off our second session, and he's the Executive Chairman of CDP, which means Carbon Disclosure Project, and he founded that in 2000, having previously founded and developed Rufus Leonard Corporate Communications, and also more recently iNetwork, the largest video conference service in Europe. He's also the member of the Environmental Research Group of the UK Faculty and Institute of Actuaries, and author of various publications, including Beautiful Corporations. So we welcome Paul Dickinson, and we leave the floor to you. Thank you very much, and thank you for coming back, all of you in the audience.
Thank you very much indeed, Margot. So I have just a few moments to talk, first of all, to thank the organizers for this great invitation, and also to talk a little bit about this particular problem. I'm going to give what I think is an optimistic message, but I want to start with some simple framing, like what we mean by sustainability. I'm going to suggest to you sustainability is the name we give to a big problem that the government can't fix. That's the definition of sustainability. And what does that mean? It means we have to look at, what are the political forces in our world? So the primary political force, this is from 1932. Can you believe that? In 1932, Berle and Means wrote a book where they suggested that the corporation was likely to supersede the nation state as the dominant organization in society. Well, corporations are extremely important, but they are answerable to their investors. What do investors have to do? They have to invest in a fiduciary way. And this is the classic definition of fiduciary duty. And all I want to tell you is it says that investors should act with prudence, discretion, and intelligence. Well, look at the presentation we had this morning and think what prudence, discretion, and intelligence means. So I will start off saying a little bit about my organization by saying we produce data, and lots of investors use our data. That's one way of introducing a good news story. I'm not going to read out these slides. I can provide them for you if you want. But really, what is CDP? Okay, we are an international not-for-profit organization. I'm pleased to be here with my colleague Emma Henningsen, who is director for us in Stockholm. We operate in 20 countries around the world. And we provide information to the market. Let me explain how that works. We cover, for 12 years, carbon. We used to be called Carbon Disclosure Project, but we have really expanded our data acquisition to include water use and forests, and we now cover about 80% of natural capital. But how do we do what we do? We have a very clear mission to bring together authority, the power, the influence of investors, and also of purchasing organizations. Big companies like Walmart and Boeing and Dell and PepsiCo. As they say in Italy, the union makes the force. So what is really happening is that these investors and purchasing organizations are using their power to go to corporations and to gather information. That is what we have been doing very patiently for 11 years. And once again, I want to tell you, this is a good news story. This is a difficult to read graph, but it represents the investors that we've been working for. Back in 2003, just 35 investors with $4 trillion US. That's still more than the GDP of the UK. But look, each year the financial authority of CDP has grown. Now we represent in 2013 722 investors. If you add up all the assets they say they have, it's $87 trillion. This is double counting, it's not all in equities, but it's more than the GDP of the world. At our first launch event, Madeleine Albright, the Secretary of State, former Secretary of State, said, "Our business is to help investors vote with their money." So look at this, $87 trillion of votes. And this is an effective system for getting companies to report, for example, on greenhouse gas emissions use, strategy on climate change. We have this year even more than 4,500 companies reporting through CDP. All that data is made publicly available through 300,000 Bloomberg terminals and many other applications. This is an effective system that works. That's why I'm positive and enthusiastic that we can have a global system of governance through the global business system. It's time to look at business as one global system. I'm pleased to say that we have more than 10 gigatons of CO2 emissions reported through the CDP system worldwide. And I can also tell you, 10 billion tons, I can also tell you we have 126 cities reporting through CDP now. That's been growing each year, representing 300 million people. All that data is also freely available. So when you get the most powerful organizations in the world together, corporations and cities, and you get them all to take an exam, what then? You score the responses. You score how well they answer the questions, and you score on their performance on climate change. And this we do. And we're quite well known. We're quite well known in many different countries, in fact. We started the organization globally, and we're honored that people like Ban Ki-moon would write the introduction to our global report, or President Zolik of the World Bank, or Chancellor Merkel. These political leaders recognize that the role of business in responding to climate change is absolutely critical. But remember that business can move very, very fast. In fact, we have Peter Backer here, who is the Ban Ki-moon of the business community. You didn't know that there was a director of the United Nations, but he's here. And what's happening is extremely exciting, and we're looking forward to hearing his comments later. But what we really need to do is simply focus. I'm going to give you some quick examples of what this looks like. We have a program called Carbon Action, where investors with $18 trillion have instructed the companies they own to make emissions reductions that have a satisfactory return. I mean, there are huge return on investment from this kind of activity. What we need to do is focus the minds of corporations. I know you can't read this graph, but the blue and the orange areas, like half of all the emissions reductions that can be undertaken, have a less than 3-year payback period. So this is actually essentially risk-free activity that has a better return than most of companies' normal activities. So it's really, we produced a report with WWF and McKinsey talking about the opportunities in US companies. They can reduce emissions 3% a year and save $780 billion doing so. Energy is expensive. We talk about a problem with carbon. Carbon is energy. Energy is expensive. If you save energy, you make money. And this is really the extraordinary opportunity that exists in climate change. I want to focus on that opportunity. And very much well, I'll talk a little bit at the end if I have time about Eckhart Vincent. So let's talk about innovation. Here is one of my favorite business thinkers, Prahalad from Harvard Business Review, talking about sustainability driving innovation. If you were paying attention this morning, as we all were, you can see that there has to be a complete change in the way we produce and consume goods. So this is the big driver of innovation that we're going to see in society. And one of the things that we are doing, and I'm sure my colleague and friend Nick Robbins will talk about, is starting to ask fossil fuel companies, for example, how do you think you value coal reserves and oil reserves when the scientists say we can't burn them? You take the conservatism that lives in corporations and the conservatism that lives in investors, and you do kind of jujitsu. You say, what are we going to do about this problem? What is your guidance to us? That is very new and very exciting. I'm going to talk a little bit now about what next. I couldn't believe the traffic I experienced in Stockholm yesterday. Unbelievable. Let's just look at the US, where I've done the statistics. Americans are spending about $900 billion a year moving themselves around. That's just people. $900 billion each year. This is a commercial opportunity. I'm not going to start talking about video telephones. I would love to talk about video telephones, but I need another 15 minutes. Let's just say that video telephones work every single day on TV news. No one complains that somebody is in the London studio or the New York studio. They don't phone up the news company and say, I didn't enjoy the news because it didn't work, because it works. So what stands in the way of 1 billion broadband video phones? I'll tell you what, we haven't got the bandwidth. To get sewage and water and electricity into people's houses, we actually needed central planning. The free market doesn't seem to be able to deliver a fibre optic cable to our homes. But it's a massive global imperative and a huge commercial opportunity. And that's why companies like Ericsson are so exciting, national champions of Sweden. Think what we can do if we dematerialize economic growth. I don't know about atomic science. I put here, this is not rocket science, okay? Really, why am I here? I'm physically here now because I don't think anyone could be trusted to ensure that I appeared effectively on that screen. And so I took a Boeing aeroplane here yesterday from London. But it's not necessary. It's because we as a society don't focus on the commercial opportunity. But my Boeing aeroplane cost £500. That money could belong to Ericsson. Just think for a minute about the scale of the economic opportunity here. We are the last generation to do this ridiculous amount of travel. Be in no doubt about that. There are more examples coming along. B&Q is a retailer in the UK. People, drills, you put a drill in the wall, you use it 10 minutes a year. They're starting to come up with business models to share drills. Cars is a classic example. I've been a member of a car club for 5 years now. I would never consider owning a car again. It is crazy to own a car unless you're using it every day. So there are many new business models coming along. The opportunities are almost too numerous to mention. But I think we can grow our economy. We can grow our economy when our economy is built on education, entertainment, communications. That is the real power and potential of dematerialization and innovation. I'm going to conclude just with thinking about the paradigm shift and what will really drive it. First of all, you want to know about democracy? Here's democracy. When I shop, I vote. When I spend my money every day, when I invest my money every day, this is the election that is going to be owned and controlled by the companies that win in this global challenge. We need to realize that spending money and investing money is a political activity. But you know what? Marketeers and marketing and communications, they're very good at that kind of challenge. And a final thought I'm going to leave you with is really about the potential for a policy that solves all problems. Sounds like a dream, huh? In my last minute. Can we have a policy that solves all problems? Well, actually, yes, we can. I met Peter Backer for the first time with a friend and advisor who died in 2008, unfortunately, called Eckhart Vincent. Eckhart Vincent put carbon dioxide, water, and these kind of things on the profit and loss of his company in 1990. Tons of CO2 multiplied by a financial value. He was a true visionary. And he came up with a simple idea. He says, value extracted tax. You know, we've got a lot of unemployment and we've got a lot of pollution. You move taxation off labour and you move it on to resource consumption. CO2 taxes, emissions taxes, you know, resource taxes. Do you know what you do? You reduce unemployment and you reduce pollution. Does it have to be more complicated? I don't think so. So this is really a very optimistic message. You know, humans are very, very clever. The only thing we haven't really done yet is woken up to the scale of the problem. And I salute Dennis and the foundation and our distinguished hosts for focusing on risk. Because there's risk and there's opportunity, there's a time for action, and it's now.
Thank you very much, Paul Dickinson. Maybe we will actually leave the floor open to a question or two. Would you be willing to answer? It sounds easy, but why is it so slow? Why? Where do you see the real gaps also in your disclosure project, and what do you see is not coming on as you would like it to?
The criticism I would make of governments, and it was kind of in my question a little bit earlier.
Maybe push.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
The criticism I would make of governments, and it was in my question earlier, is, you know, if you believe even half of what the distinguished scientist told us this morning, we have a global emergency. Now, when you have a global emergency, even if a government can't deal with the problem, and I think it's very hard for governments to deal with the problem, I think they have a responsibility to inform the citizens about the problem. I don't think it's fair for governments to not take time. You know, in the UK, when HIV started, the government sent every household in the UK a leaflet. It was very English, didn't mention sex. But it kind of warned us, right, that there was a real problem. Every household in the country is communicated. I think the governments in the OECD must go to the citizens and say, friends, we have a real problem. That's the first thing. The other answer to your question, Margot, is I think companies lobbying, businesses lobbying governments against regulations, businesses even funding, undermining the science. That, I think, is incredibly irresponsible, maybe even treason, but it happens a lot at the moment, and it's a source of great shame.
Are there other questions? Yes, please. Do we have? Yes.
I'm wondering, you're collecting a lot of data from corporations on their climate or their CO2 emissions and so on. To what extent are investors actually using all that data for their decision making?
That's a really good question. Whilst I buy myself some time, I will point out that more than 2,000 of the responses we now have external verification. So it's actually investment standard data. Okay, that's the good news. The bad news is that actually there is some correlation between how the data is used and the cost of carbon dioxide emissions or greenhouse gas emissions. So for example, if there was a $50 a ton tax tomorrow, our website would crash. Every investor in the world would say, oh no, who's going to win, who's going to lose? But at the moment, greenhouse gas emissions are free in most countries and with relatively low costs in the US, a higher cost in the EU thanks to the genius of politicians like Margot. But we're not far to Christmas here. We can't make the taxes come. But I think that there are investors, for example, who look at things like fuel efficiency, and they could see that in the 2008, which car companies were going to do better when oil reached $100 a barrel.
Yes, there was another question there. Please, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was interesting. I'm a member of parliament from Denmark, and to be honest, I'm thinking the same way as you, but I have been there for 30 years. And perhaps the new thing is that part of business are saying it now, and it's not only a discussion for environmentalists, and I appreciate that very much. I think that's very necessary. But my question is, for the time being in Europe, there is a pressure from a big part of industry, and the biggest, to not go the way you're advocating. of course, part of industry is saying what you are saying, but there is you could call them the old industry, but they are very strong for the time being. And the politicians in Europe are weak for the time being. Also, when we relate it to the price on CO2, because that could be a driving economic force to do what you are saying. So perhaps a question to you, for the time being, isn't we are in a period where we are thinking, all of us, politicians and business, due to the crisis, are in very short term. And if most politicians and most businessmen accept what you are saying, I do, then a lot of us will leave it for tomorrow to take the decision.
You are absolutely right. I think it's the biggest problem, the one you identify. And the behavior of these industries is totally unacceptable. And it was totally unacceptable how the tobacco industry behaved. And it was totally unacceptable how the slave owners behaved. But we have to get these people on television and say, you're worried about your profits, I'm worried about my children. Let's talk about that.
Well, thank you very much.